There are thresholds in your life that are not made of wood and steel, but of silence. They are the invisible doorways you stand before, where the air grows heavy and time seems to hold its breath, waiting for you to choose a direction. You can step back into the familiar room of what you've always known, or you can step forward into a hallway that holds no guarantees. For the longest time, I had lived my life firmly in the room I knew, the one where Julian was my friend, my anchor, the unwavering constant in the shifting tides of my own quiet existence. But that night, the threshold appeared not in some grand, metaphorical sense, but in the simple, illuminated frame of my bedroom doorway. He was just saying goodnight, a ritual we had performed 100 times before, but he stood there like he was waiting for me to stop him. And in that charged silence, I understood that the choice was mine, to close the door on what we were, or to leave it open for whatever we might become. He lingered. That was the word that caught in the gears of my mind, turning over and over. Lingered. It wasn't a pause, not a hesitation. It was an act of stillness, a deliberate anchoring in a space that was neither here nor there. His hand was on the doorframe, fingers spread against the white-painted wood, a mirror of the way my heart felt splayed open in my chest. The low light from the hallway carved him into a silhouette, a figure of comforting shadow and warm, golden edges. He had already said the words, a soft, gravelly, "Good night, Leo." That was as much a part of our nightly routine as the sound of the city settling into a murmur outside my window. But his body hadn't followed the sentiment. He remained, a statue of unspoken questions, his weight shifted onto one leg, his head slightly bowed. Every line of him seemed to be communicating a profound inertia, a reluctance to complete the simple act of turning and walking down the short hall to the guest room he had all but claimed as his own. My own room felt vast and empty behind me. The cool sheets of my bed an invitation I was suddenly hyper-aware of. I was already under the covers, propped up on one elbow, a book lying forgotten on my chest. The entire universe had contracted to this single, silent exchange, this tableau of intent and uncertainty. I could feel the pull of him, not in a physical sense, but as if he were a gravitational force bending the very fabric of the space between us. I watched the slight rise and fall of his shoulders with each breath, trying to decipher the rhythm, searching for a clue in the tempo of his existence. Was he tired? Was he troubled? Or was he, like me, caught in the grip of this sudden, suffocating awareness that the air between us had changed, that the pressure had dropped, heralding a storm that had been gathering on the horizon for years? He was just saying goodnight. It was a simple, declarative act, but the silence that followed it was a question, a plea, an invitation. And as I lay there, my own breathing hitched and shallow, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating weight of knowing that the answer was mine to give. To understand the weight of that doorway, you have to understand the foundation it was built upon. Julian and I were not a story of sudden combustion. We were a geological formation, shaped by the slow, immense pressure of time and proximity. We met in the chaotic, hopeful wilderness of our first year of college, two disparate elements drawn together by a shared sense of being slightly out of sync with the world around us. I was the quiet observer, the one who found more truth in the way light fell across a face than in the words the face was speaking. I carried a camera with me like a shield, a way to mediate my experience of the world, to capture it and analyze it from a safe distance. He was, on the surface, my opposite. Julian was a current of kinetic energy, a whirlwind of easy laughter, quick smiles, and a restless intelligence that saw the world as a series of complex, fascinating systems to be understood and navigated. He was studying computer science. I was studying fine art photography. We should have been oil and water. Instead, we were like two sides of a riverbank, defined by the same steady current that flowed between us. We found each other in a crowded university library, both hiding from a mandatory pep rally. I was tucked into a remote corral, sketching the patterns of dust motes dancing in a shaft of late afternoon sun. He stumbled upon my hiding place while searching for an obscure text on algorithmic theory. He didn't say much at first, just gave a small, apologetic smile and took a seat at the adjacent desk. But the silence that settled between us wasn't empty. It was comfortable, companionable. An hour later, he slid a piece of paper across the desk to me. On it, he had written, You see things differently, don't you? It wasn't a question so much as a statement of fact, an acknowledgement. I looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. He had eyes the color of moss after a rainstorm, and a way of looking at you that made you feel both completely seen and completely safe. I just nodded, and a slow smile spread across his face. That was the beginning. Our friendship was built in those quiet spaces, in the shared language of unspoken understanding. We spent countless nights in that same library, me editing photos while he wrote code, the only sounds the soft click of my mouse and the rhythmic tap of his keyboard, a kind of nocturnal symphony that became the soundtrack to my life. He was the one person who could sit with me in silence for hours without it feeling awkward. He understood my need for solitude, but he also had an uncanny ability to know when that solitude was tipping over into loneliness. He would appear at my door with takeout and a bad movie, a silent offering of presents that said, "You don't have to be alone," without ever needing the words. He became the scaffolding around which I built my adult life, the steady hand on my back during my first gallery show, the voice of reason when my own anxieties threatened to swallow me whole. My feelings for him, the ones that were now humming with a dangerous voltage in the silence of my bedroom doorway, had grown just as slowly, just as organically. They were not a sudden revelation but a gradual dawning, like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom. At first, there was just a vague outline, an indistinct shape of affection that I labeled best friendship. But over time, the details began to emerge, sharpened by 1,000 small moments. The way my breath would catch when he'd laugh, a full-throated, uninhibited sound that seemed to light up the room. The proprietary pang I'd feel when he talked about a date. The instinctive way I would track his presence in a crowded room, my senses attuned to him as if by some invisible tether. I kept these feelings locked away in a light-proof box in the darkroom of my heart, too terrified to expose them to the harsh, revealing light of day. Our friendship was too precious, too vital. It was the central pillar of my life, and the thought of jeopardizing it, of seeing it crumble into a ruin of awkwardness and regret, was unbearable. So I became an expert archivist of my own heart, carefully cataloging every yearning glance, every casual touch that sent a jolt through my system, and filing them away under platonic. Julian, for his part, seemed entirely oblivious. He moved through the world with an open, earnest heart, but his emotional landscape was one I found difficult to map. He dated a series of bright, lovely women, falling into relationships with a kind of hopeful sincerity that always ended in a quiet, amicable parting. He would talk to me about them, about the disconnects he couldn't quite articulate, the feeling that he was performing a role he hadn't fully memorized the lines for. I would listen, my heart a knot of conflicting emotions, sympathy for his confusion, a selfish flicker of hope, and a deep, abiding guilt for that hope. I was his confidant, the safe harbor where he could dock his emotionally battered ship. To him, I was a constant, a brother, a bedrock. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was riddled with fault lines of longing, that the bedrock was, in fact, a dormant volcano. For years, I had maintained the peace, policed the borders of our friendship with a vigilant, exhausting diligence. I had become a master of redirection, of casual nonchalance, of swallowing the words that so often rose in my throat. I had convinced myself that this was enough, that having him in my life in this capacity was a gift I should not be greedy enough to question. The shift, when it came, was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, tectonic slide. It began, as so many seismic events do, with an ending. Julian had been dating Sarah for nearly 2 years. She was a landscape architect, vibrant and kind, and of all the women he had been with, she seemed the most likely to last. They had built a life together, a comfortable domesticity of shared bookshelves and weekend trips to the coast. I had learned to compartmentalize the ache I felt when I saw them together, to genuinely appreciate her for the happiness she brought him. I had settled into my role as the supportive best friend, the permanent third wheel. I thought I had made my peace with it. Then, one Tuesday night, my phone rang. It was Julian, his voice frayed and thin, a threadbare version of its usual warmth. "She's gone, Leo," he said, and the 3 words were so laden with a hollowed-out sort of grief that I felt the floor drop out from under me. She packed her things. She said she felt like she was living with a ghost. He showed up at my apartment an hour later. looking like a ship that had been dashed against the rocks. He wasn't crying. It was worse than that. He was eerily calm, his face a pale, blank mask, his moss-green eyes clouded over, opaque. He carried a single duffel bag, which he dropped by the door as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He didn't offer any more explanation, and I didn't ask for any. The unspoken rule of our friendship was that words were often secondary to presence. I made him tea, the way I always did when he was stressed or tired, and we sat on my worn leather sofa, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the walls. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared into the steam rising from his mug. The silence in the room was different from our usual comfortable quiet. This was a heavy, wounded silence, filled with the ghosts of things left unsaid, not just between him and Sarah, but, I suspected, within Julian himself. "I don't think I know how to love someone properly," he finally whispered, the words barely disturbing the air. "I try. I go through the motions. I say the right things. But it's like I'm watching myself from a distance, performing a part. Sarah deserved more than that. She deserved someone who was actually present in the room with her." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine, and what I saw in their depths was not just heartbreak, but a profound and terrifying confusion, a sense of being utterly lost. He looked like a man who had been navigating by a faulty compass his entire life, and had only just realized he was miles off course, in a wilderness he didn't recognize. My heart ached for him, a pure, uncomplicated ache that for a moment superseded everything else. I wanted to fix it, to gather up the shattered pieces of his self-perception and glue them back together, but I knew I couldn't. All I could offer was what I had always offered. "You can stay here," I said, the words simple and solid. "For as long as you need." He nodded, a barely perceptible movement, and a single tear finally escaped, tracing a slow, glistening path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just let it fall. That night, he slept on the sofa, wrapped in a quilt my grandmother had made, a small, huddled shape in the blue pre-dawn light. I lay awake in my own bed, listening to the unfamiliar sound of his breathing in the next room, and I felt the tectonic plates of our friendship begin to grind against each other, shifting into a new, unknown alignment. The carefully constructed boundaries I had spent years erecting had been breached, not by me, but by his pain. He had come to my harbor seeking refuge, and I had opened the gates without a second thought. I just didn't know if I would be able to close them again. That first night bled into a week, and the week became a month. Julian's presence in my apartment became a new kind of normal. His duffel bag was unpacked, his clothes finding their way into the drawers of the guest room dresser. His coffee mug, a ridiculously large ceramic one with a picture of a wolf howling at the moon, took up permanent residence on my dish rack. The sofa, however, remained his bed. Every night, I would offer him the guest room, a perfectly comfortable space with its own bed and a window overlooking the quiet courtyard, and every night he would refuse with a small shake of his head. "The couch is fine, Leo. Honestly, I feel closer to the center of things here." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't push. His grief was a fragile, complex thing, and I was determined to give it the space it needed to breathe. But the proximity began to work on me like a slow-acting poison. Having him so close, so constantly, was both a dream and a torture. I was hyper-aware of him in a way that was exhausting. I knew the sound of his footsteps in the hall, the particular way he sighed when he was frustrated with a line of code, the smell of his shampoo that now lingered in the bathroom in the mornings. My apartment, once my solitary sanctuary, was now a shared space, every surface charged with the energy of his presence. I would be in my darkroom, the red safe light casting an infernal glow on my work, and my mind would drift, wondering what he was doing in the living room. Was he reading? Was he staring at the ceiling? Was he thinking about her? The focus I had always relied on, the meditative state I entered when I was developing film, was fractured. He was a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of my thoughts, a magnetic north to which my internal compass was perpetually, irrevocably drawn. Then, one night, the ritual began. It was late, well after 2 in the morning. A thunderstorm was raging outside, one of those dramatic summer storms that shakes the window panes and makes the lights flicker. I had been woken by a particularly loud clap of thunder and was lying in bed, listening to the rain lash against the glass. I heard a soft creak of floorboards from the living room, then a hesitant shuffling sound. My bedroom door was, as always, slightly ajar, a habit from a childhood fear of the dark that I had never quite shaken. A sliver of pale light from the hallway fell across my floor. Julian's shape appeared in that sliver, a tall, uncertain shadow. He stood there for a long moment, and I held my breath, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. I pretended to be asleep, my eyes slitted open just enough to see. "Leo," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a frantic scramble of possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was he having a nightmare? Was he sick? Was he finally going to talk about Sarah? He took another step, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He came to the side of my bed and just stood there, looking down at me. In the intermittent flashes of lightning that illuminated the room, I could see his face. It was a study in conflict, his brow furrowed, his mouth a tight line. He looked like a lost child. He reached out a hand, not to touch me, but as if to feel the air around me, and then let it drop back to his side. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed, a deep, shuddering sound, and turned away. He didn't go back to the couch. Instead, he grabbed the spare blanket from the chair in the corner of my room, lay down on the floor beside my bed, and curled into a ball. I lay there, rigid with shock and 1,000 other unnameable emotions, listening to the sound of his quiet breathing just a few feet away, a counterpoint to the fury of the storm outside. The floorboards were a ridiculously thin boundary, but it felt like the Grand Canyon. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up, the blanket folded neatly on the chair. Neither of us mentioned it. We fell into our morning routine, me making coffee, him checking emails, as if nothing had happened. But something had. A new line had been drawn, or perhaps an old one had been smudged. The storm had passed, but the atmospheric pressure in the apartment remained irrevocably altered. A few nights later, it happened again. This time there was no storm, only the ambient hum of the city. I woke to the feeling of being watched and opened my eyes to find him standing in the doorway again. This time, I didn't pretend to be asleep. "Julian," I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "You okay?" He started, as if my voice had broken a spell. "Yeah, sorry. Just a bad dream." His excuse felt thin, flimsy. "The floor can't be comfortable," I said, the words coming out before I had a chance to censor them. I pushed myself up, flicking on the small lamp on my bedside table. The soft, warm light filled the room, chasing the shadows into the corners. My bed's a queen. There's plenty of room. The offer hung in the air between us, shimmering with unspoken implications. It was a reckless, stupid thing to say, a blatant disregard for the rules I had so carefully followed for years. But seeing him standing there, looking so vulnerable and adrift, had overridden all my carefully constructed defenses. He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze flicking from my face to the empty side of the bed and back again. I could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was weighing the strangeness of the act against the pull of whatever need had driven him to my door in the first place. Finally, with a small, resigned nod, he walked into the room. He didn't get in on the other side. Instead, he rounded the bed and slid under the covers on my side, his back to me, keeping a careful, deliberate distance between us. The mattress dipped with his weight, a small shift that felt like a seismic event. I turned off the light, plunging us back into darkness, my mind screaming. He was in my bed. After all these years of carefully managed distance, of guarded thoughts and secret longings, he was here, in my bed. I lay there, stiff as a board, every nerve ending tingling with a painful, heightened awareness. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the small gulf of cotton sheets. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, deeper now, more even. I tried to regulate my own, to match his rhythm, but my heart was a frantic, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This was a mistake. A terrible, wonderful, catastrophic mistake. This was a line from which there was no retreat. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and his breathing settled into the slow, deep cadence of sleep, a strange sense of peace began to settle over me. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, something warm and profound. It was the simple, undeniable comfort of his presence, not in the next room, But here, a solid, breathing reality beside me. Whatever his reasons, whatever his demons, he had sought comfort with me, and I had given it. For now, that would have to be enough. This became our new ritual, the unspoken arrangement that defined our nights. He would start on the couch, and sometime in the deep, quiet hours of the morning, he would appear in my doorway. I would pretend to wake up, murmur his name, and shift over, creating a space for him. He would slip into bed, always with his back to me, maintaining that chaste, careful distance. We never spoke of it in the morning. We would wake up, untangle ourselves from the sheets, and go about our day as if we were just roommates who happened to share a sleeping space out of a strange, nocturnal necessity. It was a bizarre charade, a performance of platonic intimacy that was stretched so taut with unspoken tension I felt it might snap at any moment. For me, those nights were a form of exquisite torture. I would lie awake for hours, listening to him sleep, my body rigid with the effort of not reaching out, of not closing the 6 inches of space that separated us. I memorized the shape of his shoulders in the moonlight, the way a lock of his dark hair would fall across the pillow, the soft, almost imperceptible whistle of his exhale. My bed, my most private space, had become a sacred, agonizing territory. It smelled of him now, a faint, clean scent of soap and laundry detergent, and something that was uniquely Julian, a scent I found myself breathing in deeply when I was alone. I was living in a state of suspended animation, caught between the sheer, unadulterated joy of having him so close and the crushing weight of knowing it meant nothing. Or, more accurately, that it meant something to him that I couldn't decipher, something that had nothing to do with the desperate, yearning love I harbored for him. I became a student of his nonverbal language, an obsessive analyst of every subtle gesture. I was a photographer, after all. My art was based on capturing the truth in the fleeting moments between poses, the unguarded expressions, the tiny details that told the real story. I applied this same intense scrutiny to him. I documented the way the tension in his shoulders would visibly ease when he came home to my apartment after a long day of consulting work, the way he would seek me out, finding me in my studio or the kitchen, and just stand there for a moment, as if simply confirming my presence was enough to ground him. He was using me as an anchor in the storm of his own emotional wreckage, and I was letting him, because I was selfish enough to prefer being his anchor to being nothing at all. I told myself I was being a good friend. I told myself I was helping him heal. But I knew, in the honest, lonely chambers of my own heart, that I was also hoping. I was nurturing a tiny, fragile seed of hope in the barren soil of our platonic arrangement, watering it with every shared silence, every accidental brush of hands. Every night, he chose the space beside me over the solitude of another room. The distance between us and the bed began to shrink, an erosion so gradual I almost didn't notice it at first. It was a matter of inches, then an inch, then less. One night, I woke to find his arm thrown across my waist, his hand resting on my hip. His breathing was warm against the back of my neck. I froze, my entire body locking up in a panic of bliss and terror. I lay there for what felt like hours, not daring to move, not daring to breathe, simply absorbing the reality of his touch. It was heavy, solid, real. It was everything I had ever wanted and everything I was terrified of losing. In his sleep, he had crossed the line that in our waking hours we so carefully, so respectfully, observed. When the first light of dawn began to creep into the room, I gently, painstakingly, lifted his arm and slid out from under it, my skin tingling where he had touched me. When he woke up, he didn't seem to notice anything was different. The erosion continued. A few nights later, I woke up to find myself turned towards him, my face buried in the warm curve of his shoulder, his arm now wrapped fully around me, holding me close. This time, I didn't move. I let myself stay, let myself feel the comfort and the rightness of it, just for a little while. The unspoken nature of our arrangement was both its shield and its greatest danger. Because we never talked about it, it existed in a liminal space, a place of plausible deniability. He could tell himself he was just seeking comfort from a friend after a traumatic breakup. He was lonely. He was having nightmares. He wasn't used to sleeping alone. There were a dozen logical, rational, and entirely platonic explanations for his behavior. And because he never gave any indication that it was more than that, I was forced to accept those explanations, at least on the surface. But my heart, my traitorous, hopeful heart, was busy writing a different story. It was a story of subconscious desires, of a body seeking what the mind was not yet ready to acknowledge. It was a story where his sleeping form, reaching for mine in the dark, was a confession. I was drowning in ambiguity, and the silence that had once been the foundation of our friendship was now the thing that was suffocating me. The breaking point, the moment the threshold finally appeared in my doorway, came on a Thursday night. It had been a particularly hard day for him. He'd had a call with his parents, a stilted, difficult conversation where he'd finally told them about the breakup. He came home looking diminished, as if the conversation had physically drained him of his substance. He barely spoke during dinner, just pushed food around his plate, his eyes distant and shadowed. Later, we sat on the sofa, watching some mindless documentary about deep-sea life. He leaned his head against my shoulder, a gesture that had become increasingly common, and I could feel the tremors of a quiet sadness running through him. I resisted the overwhelming urge to put my arm around him, to pull him closer. I kept my hands clasped in my own lap, a white-knuckled grip on my self-control. When it was time for bed, the routine felt different. The air was heavier, charged with the day's sorrow. He stood up and stretched, the movement slow and weary. "Good night, Leo," he said, his voice rough. He turned and walked towards his room, the guest room. My heart plummeted. For the first time in weeks, he was choosing his own space. The ritual was broken. A cold, sharp panic seized me. It was irrational, I knew. It was just one night. But it felt like a verdict, a final judgment on my silent, foolish hopes. It felt like he was finally healing, finally pulling away, and the thought was an agony. I went to my own room, the space feeling cavernous and cold without the promise of his eventual presence. I got into bed and stared at the ceiling, the familiar ache of loneliness returning with a vengeance. And then I heard his footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside my door. I sat up, my heart leaping into my throat. He was there, standing in the doorway, a dark shape against the hall light. But he didn't come in. He just stood there. This was different from all the other nights. There was no pretense of sleepwalking, no whisper of a bad dream. He was just standing there, fully awake, fully present, his gaze fixed on me. This was the moment I described at the beginning, the moment the world stopped. He had said goodnight. He had completed the verbal part of our ritual. But he was waiting. His hand was on the doorframe, his body a study in arrested motion. The silence stretched, thin and humming, like a high-tension wire. It was no longer a comfortable quiet or a wounded quiet. It was a question. It was the question. Everything I had ever felt for him, every secret I had ever kept, rose up in me, a powerful, undeniable tide. All the fear, all the caution, all the years of self-denial, they were all there, screaming at me to say nothing, to do nothing, to let him turn and walk away, to preserve the fragile piece of what we were. But looking at him, standing there in my doorway, looking so lost, and so hopeful, and so utterly, heartbreakingly vulnerable, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't live in the gray space. I couldn't spend one more night analyzing his sleeping form for clues. I needed an answer, even if it was the one that would break my heart. The room I had been living in, the safe, familiar room of our friendship, suddenly felt like a prison. And the hallway beyond the threshold, as terrifying and unknown as it was the only place that offered the possibility of air, of light, of truth. "Don't go," I said. The words were quiet, barely a whisper, but they landed in the silence with the force of a physical blow. I saw his shoulders, which had been tense and high, drop an inch. He took a slow, deep breath, a man coming up for air after being underwater for a very long time. He didn't say anything. He just pushed himself off the doorframe and walked into the room, his eyes never leaving mine. He came to the side of the bed, the same way he had that first night, but this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. He sat down on the edge of the mattress, facing me, the space between us now charged with a new, terrifying, and exhilarating energy. The air was thick with everything we had never said, a dense fog of years of unspoken affection and shared history. He just looked at me, his moss-green eyes searching my face as if he were trying to read a map he had only just discovered. I could see the pulse beating in the hollow of his throat. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had no idea what was going to happen next. I had thrown the stone into the placid lake of our friendship, and now I could only watch the ripples spread, knowing they would change the reflection forever. He reached out, his movement slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. His fingers brushed against my cheek, his touch feather-light and tentative, yet it sent a searing jolt through my entire body. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, a gentle, questioning caress. "Leo," he whispered, my name a sound of discovery on his lips. And then he leaned in. It wasn't a rush of passion, not the kind of kiss you see in movies. It was a slow, gentle collision, a tentative press of his lips against mine that was more of a question than a statement. It was hesitant and soft, and tasted faintly of the mint tea we had shared earlier. It was a kiss that held a decade of friendship and a universe of unspoken longing. I responded instinctively, my hand coming up to rest on the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his soft hair, pulling him fractionally closer. It was a confirmation. An answer. Yes. The kiss deepened, but it never lost its quality of gentle reverence, of profound, dawning surprise. It was a discovery for both of us, a mapping of new territory that felt, impossibly, like coming home. When he finally pulled back, it was only by a few inches. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and unsteady. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for this. Words felt clumsy and inadequate, blunt instruments for something so delicate and so momentous. We had spent years communicating in silence, and it seemed only fitting that the most important conversation of our lives would be held in this way, too. In the quiet space between breaths, in the gentle pressure of his forehead against mine, in the way his hand was still cradling my face as if I were something precious and breakable, a new language was being born. A new world was taking shape. He had been standing in the doorway, waiting for me to stop him. And I had. I had asked him to stay. And in doing so, I had finally, given myself permission to step out of the room I knew and into the vast, uncertain, and beautiful possibility of him. The aftermath was not the explosion of clarity I might have expected. It was more like the quiet, stunned silence after a lightning strike. The air is different, ozone sharp and electric, and the world looks both the same and completely transformed. We didn't talk that night. After the kiss, he simply slid into bed beside me, and for the first time, he faced me. He pulled me against his chest, wrapping his arms around me, holding me with a gentle, protective firmness. I rested my head in the hollow of his shoulder, listening to the steady, reassuring thrum of his heartbeat beneath my ear, and for the first time in a long time, my own frantic heart began to slow, matching its rhythm. I fell asleep like that, wrapped in the warmth and the scent of him, feeling safer and more terrified than I had ever felt in my life. The morning brought the harsh light of reality. I woke up first, to find him still asleep, his face peaceful, his arms still draped possessively over me. The sight was so painfully domestic, so achingly tender, that it almost broke me. This was the image I had held in the secret darkroom of my heart for years, and now it was real, tangible, bathed in the soft morning sun. But with the light came the fear. What had we done? What did this mean? The ambiguity that had been my torment was gone, replaced by a new, more terrifying uncertainty. I had crossed the line, and I had no idea what was on the other side. As if sensing my anxiety, Julian stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they were soft with sleep. Then, recognition dawned, and with it, a flicker of something I couldn't read. Panic? Regret? He pulled his arm back slowly, as if he'd been burned, and sat up, running a hand through his already messy hair. Morning, he mumbled, not looking at me. He swung his legs out of bed and stood up, his back to me. I'm gonna grab a shower. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the bed with the ghost of his warmth and a cold, creeping dread. The easy intimacy of the night had vanished, replaced by a chasm of awkward silence. We moved around each other in the kitchen like strangers, our usual morning ballet of coffee and toast replaced by a clumsy, stilted choreography of avoidance. He kept his eyes on his phone, his shoulders hunched, a defensive wall erected where there had once been an open door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and demand to know what was going on in his head. I wanted to ask, Did last night mean anything to you? Or was I just a port in a storm? Was I just a convenient, warm body to chase away the ghosts of your loneliness? But the words wouldn't come. The fear of hearing the wrong answer was a gag in my mouth. This went on for 3 days. 3 days of agonizing, polite distance. He started sleeping on the couch again. He would say goodnight from the living room. A quick, night, Leo. That was a hollow echo of our old ritual. He didn't linger in the doorway. He didn't even come down the hall. My bedroom felt like a tomb. The silence that had once been our sanctuary was now a weapon, a thick, suffocating blanket of things unsaid. I felt like I was losing my mind. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in the darkness of that kiss was wilting, dying on the vine. I started to believe I had imagined it all, that I had misinterpreted a moment of grief-stricken weakness as something more. I had been so stupid. I had risked everything, our beautiful, perfect friendship, for a fantasy. The ache in my chest was a constant, physical presence, a weight I carried with me from the moment I woke up to the moment I fell into a restless, dream-haunted sleep. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in the living room, staring out the window at the rain-streaked city skyline, his reflection a pale, ghostly image in the glass. I came and stood beside him, my own reflection appearing next to his. We stood like that for a full minute, 2 silent ghosts trapped in the glass. "We need to talk, Julian," I said finally, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. He flinched but didn't turn. "There's nothing to talk about. Nothing to talk about." The dam of my self-control finally broke. "You kissed me. You held me all night like you never wanted to let go. And for the past 3 days, you've been acting like I don't exist. You don't get to do that. You don't get to open that door and then slam it in my face. I deserve more than that. Our friendship deserves more than that." My voice cracked on the last words, the raw hurt finally spilling out. He turned to face me then, and the look on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't anger or indifference. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He looked like a cornered animal. "I don't know what I'm doing, Leo," he whispered, his voice raw. "Okay, I don't know." That night, it felt right. It felt more right than anything has felt in a very long time. And that terrifies me. He took a step back, putting distance between us, as if my proximity was a physical threat. All my life, I've had this roadmap. College, job, girlfriend, marriage. I've been following it, checking the boxes. But it never felt real. With Sarah, I loved her. I did. But it was like I was playing a part. The loving boyfriend. And she knew it. That's why she left. She said I was a ghost. He paced the room, his movements agitated, his hands gesturing as he tried to articulate the chaos in his head. "And then I came here. And with you. It's just easy. It's quiet. I don't have to perform. I can just be." And that night, when you asked me to stay, something just broke. All the walls I've built up, all the rules I thought I had to follow, they just crumbled. And kissing you, it was like I could finally breathe. But now, in the daylight, I look at it, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what I am. Am I? Is this who I am? What does this mean for us? I can't lose you, Leo. You're everything. And I'm so scared that I've already broken the only thing in my life that ever felt real. His confession, his raw, unfiltered fear, washed over me, extinguishing the fire of my anger and leaving behind a deep, profound empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified. He was a man whose entire conception of himself had been shattered, and he was standing in the rubble, trying to figure out who he was. I had been so focused on my own hurt that I hadn't seen his. I had seen his withdrawal as a rejection of me, when in reality, it was a retreat from a truth about himself that he wasn't ready to face. I closed the distance between us, stepping into his frantic orbit. I reached out and took his hands, stilling his restless pacing. His fingers were cold, and I wrapped my own around them, trying to lend him some of my warmth. "Hey," I said softly, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Look at me. You haven't broken anything. We haven't broken anything. We just found a new door. And it's okay to be scared of what's on the other side. I am too." A tear slid down his cheek, and this time, I reached up and wiped it away with my thumb. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Julian," I continued, my voice low and steady. "You don't have to label this, or define who you are, or figure out the next 10 years of your life. All you have to do is answer one question. Just one. When you kissed me. When you held me. Did it feel true? He stared at me, his green eyes shimmering with unshed tears, the battle within him playing out across his face. He swallowed hard, his throat working. And then, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Yes, he breathed, the word a fragile puff of air. It was the only thing that felt true. And that was it. That was all I needed. The fear didn't magically disappear, not for either of us. The uncertainty about the future didn't vanish in a puff of smoke. But the foundation, the bedrock, was there. Truth. It was a starting point. It was enough. Okay, I said, my own voice thick with relief. Then we start there. We just start there. Together. The resolution wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was a series of small, quiet choices. That night, when it was time for bed, he didn't go to the couch. He walked with me to my room, his hand hesitantly finding mine in the darkened hallway. He didn't get into bed with his back to me. He faced me, and he pulled me close, and he whispered goodnight into my hair. And this time, the words weren't a farewell, they were a promise. The door to my bedroom, which had for so long been a symbol of our uncertainty, a threshold of unspoken questions, was gently, quietly, clicked shut. There was no need to leave it open anymore. There was no one trying to escape. We began to build our new normal, not on the ruins of our old friendship, but on its solid, unshakable foundation. We learned to talk, really talk, filling in the silent spaces that had been populated by my assumptions and his fears. He told me about the years of feeling disconnected, of feeling like an actor in his own life, and how the quiet, unconditional acceptance he found with me was the only place he felt he could take off the costume. I told him about the years of silent longing, of the photos I had taken of him that no one else had ever seen, of the way my heart had always been calibrated to him. We were two cartographers, mapping out the hidden landscapes of each other's hearts, discovering that the terrain was not as different as we had feared. The intimacy between us blossomed in the newfound safety of our honesty. It was in the simple, domestic moments. The way he would wrap his arms around me from behind while I was making coffee in the morning, resting his chin on my shoulder. The way I would reach for his hand when we were walking down the street, his fingers lacing through mine without a moment's hesitation. The quiet evenings spent on the sofa, my head in his lap while he read, his fingers gently tracing patterns in my hair. It was a language of touch that was no longer ambiguous, but a clear, constant affirmation. You are home. You are safe. You are mine. We were learning that love wasn't always a raging storm. Sometimes, it was the quiet, steady peace after the rain has passed, the world washed clean and smelling of new beginnings. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A simple goodnight. A figure in a doorway. A quiet conversation in a rain-streaked living room. They don't announce themselves with trumpets or fanfare. They slip in through the cracks of your everyday existence. But these are the moments that define you. They are the thresholds where you are given a choice. To remain in the safety of the room you have always known, or to step into the hallway of an unknown future. For years, I had stood paralyzed before that door, terrified of what I might lose. But what I learned, in the quiet, steady warmth of Julian's arms, was that the greatest risk is not in stepping through the door. It's in letting the fear of the unknown convince you to never turn the knob at all. We didn't have a map for the hallway we had entered, but we had each other. And we began to heal, to build, to love, in the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned to create together.